So hello everybody, my name is Ryan Moothart. I started with the Seattle chapter just a few months back, probably in September. I actually just moved back to Seattle this past July after a few years away in the Midwest, but was living in Seattle before that. I started writing this book in 2012, and it took me about 3.5 to 4 years to fully edit, publish, make sure it said what I meant to say and I meant what I wanted to say. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the introduction, which is about 15 pages. It's going to take about 25-ish minutes. And what the introduction is pretty much it frames everything else that's written in the book and any of the arguments that I make. So I'm hoping if you find this enjoyable, there are copies here at the store that you can buy and purchase if you so choose. If you don't want to buy it, there are multiple copies in the King County Library if you want to check it out there. So I know those are there. But yeah, and then after I'm finished reading, I'll be happy to take any questions before Marty comes up here and talks about the bioregion. All right. And this is a non-fictional book, so this is, I try to say a lot in a few words, but some of it can be a bit dense because it is a bit non-fiction, but I'll do my best to keep it lively and not bore people. All right, chapter 1, the introduction. There is a scene and setting I believe is more profound and beautiful than anything else in the world. I noticed it the first morning after moving into a new apartment in Seattle a few years ago. I woke up early after a long day of travel and moving heavy boxes. My new apartment building sat atop a steep hill, overlooking Seattle's historic Pioneer Square neighborhood. My unit had a large windows facing west, out onto Smith Tower and the Puget Sound. That morning, I walked into my new living room and looked out my windows. I had a crystal clear view of the Olympic Mountains across the Sound. The gaps in the clouds were dispersing the morning sunrise in a majestic pattern that accented the landscape perfectly. It was as if God himself, or Mother Nature herself, had planned this scene as the most stunning welcome I've ever experienced. I remember staring at this serene and picturesque view, losing my sense of time, and forgetting all of my logistical concerns about moving to a new city. I knew immediately that I had found the sense of place that I will forever call home. Each time I look out onto these mountains, they provide me with a sense of wonder and clarity. Each time I recall my first morning taking in their view, I remember the feeling of hope and tranquility they provided me. I am not the first person to have such an experience in Seattle, or in any other locality in this region of the continent, and I am surely not the last. I dare say this type of experience is commonplace here. It's a powerful phenomenon that has shaped the experiences of just about everyone who lives here, and even those who visit. It's a phenomenon that forces you to pay attention to the natural beauty that surrounds you, and to admire all that stems from it. And it's a phenomenon that permeates throughout the culture of this great region. The area known to most as the Pacific Northwest is coming into its own. A relatively vibrant, ample, and distinct environment of temperate forests and rain encapsulates an equally distinct society of people. We, the people who call this region home, are unquestionably different from the rest of the continent. We, along with those who came before us, have distinguished this region's identity rapidly over the past few decades, in the context of modern history. It was once an area where indigenous tribes lived off the land, protected it, utilized it, and replenished it. It then became an area where transplant Americans and Canadians settled to quote-unquote tame the West under the foolish and destructive philosophy of manifest destiny. Now, it's an area where its people are once again embodying its true nature. Individuals and communities, simultaneously different and alike, are living with devotion to this region and all it has to offer. We have disassociated ourselves culturally and politically in exceptional ways from the rest of the continent. And to some of us who have realized this, our region goes by a different name, Cascadia. Cascadia was created as a sociological identity for the region to describe its unique culture and geography. While it often refers to Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, the three main entities that make up the Pacific Northwest, it also pertains to Idaho, Southeast Alaska, Western Montana, and Northern California. The idea's essence has sparked dreams of sustainability, liberty, and progress for the region and its people by those who have explored the true nature of their surroundings. And such dreams have remained peculiar in Cascadian society, whimsical and merely intriguing, until now. Something is happening in Cascadia. As ordinary as that sounds in the context of a vague occurrence unimportant to our daily existence or our purpose in life, I mean it as anything but that. Something, a word used in place of a specific or clear idea, does not necessarily connote insignificance. That something is, I believe, becoming incredibly significant. A force not yet clearly defined is influencing some of us in Cascadia in ways we can't fully comprehend. Many of us don't feel this force and aren't acutely aware of it yet. But a few of us have let it work its influence, and we yearn to help the rest of us feel it. Curious citizens are linking up on social networking sites to discuss what it means to be Cascadian and why it feels important. Activists are gathering in small chapters across the region to foster ideas for improving and raising awareness of it. The Cascadian flag has become a noticeable presence from major sporting events to retail shops to car bumpers in Portland, Seattle, and Vancouver. Academic-themed conferences and cultural festivals have begun to be held annually to explore and celebrate the different aspects of the Cascadian identity. I've been moved by this omnipotent force and have spent some time exploring its nature. This exploration has given me many ideas I feel compelled to prescribe and share with my fellow Cascadians, hence my reason for writing this book. So I say again, something is happening in Cascadia, but a more apt phrase for what I'm trying to communicate may be that something is beginning in Cascadia. A social movement more cultural than political is converging to both explore this newfound, yet anciently grounded identity and make a human argument for its distinction. From the native tribes that have inhabited this land since long before immigrants arrived, to the community activists, public servants, and countless business organizations founded here today, we have strived to utilize the best parts of our individual drive and communal interdependence to achieve great things. Now, in our current time of trial, a few of us have come to realize we're going to need to exemplify our distinctiveness again on levels never before seen, to lift ourselves up and progress towards a more stable future. Small pockets of advocates throughout the region in both the United States and Canada have banded together to raise awareness of this fact. A movement that recognizes no arbitrary borders and promotes a new philosophy for the future is growing. About 40 years ago, American ecologist and California counterculture icon Peter Berg helped define a new eco-political concept called bioregionalism. This idea has stirred the minds of some environmental and political activists in Cascadia. He stated, quote, "A bioregion refers both to a geographical terrain and a terrain of consciousness, to a place and the ideas that have developed about how to live in that place. Within a bioregion, the conditions that influence life are similar, and these in turn have influenced human occupancy." End quote. Geographically, the Cascadian bioregion, defined by ecological traits and the watershed regions of the Columbia and Fraser rivers, stretches from northern California to southeast Alaska, from the Pacific coast to the Canadian Rocky Mountains. And while these ecological boundaries are intrinsic components for applying bioregionalism to Cascadia, it's the idea behind bioregionalism as a theory that's at the heart of this movement that's beginning to take hold here. We live in a particular region with a particular environment that has produced, or at least helped influence, particular cultures, philosophies, and ways of life. This idea is also the foundation for the theory that our systems of economy, governance, and interdependence should be based upon the natural, where such environmentally defined regions are free and sovereign political entities, the civic systems within them based upon regional, locally assorted principles, cultures, and philosophies. And I specify local assortment to iterate that such transcendental elements, such as culture, within a bioregion can be diverse, but are ultimately compatible because they originate in part from the same bioregion within which they exist. That being said, the theoretical foundation for bioregionalism is not entirely undisputed. Opinions differ on how exactly bioregionalism works. Some hypothesize that within a given region, nature is the ultimate determining factor of how culture and identity are expressed, while others say nature merely sets limitations on or corresponds with its analogous culture and identity. Such premises are analyzed, deconstructed, and debated among academics and common citizens, and likely will be for the foreseeable future. I can claim without hesitation, however, that bioregionalism will play a significant role in Cascadia's immediate future. Not only is it currently the theoretical keystone to small but significant activism that has already begun propagating awareness of Cascadia as an idea, but it can and will be built upon, including in this book, to transform this movement from a niche and localized phenomenon to a widespread shift in thought throughout the greater Cascadian zeitgeist. We are unique. Our culture, our politics, our economy, our history are all unique because we live in a different environment from the rest of Canada and the United States. And when I say environment, I'm not just talking about our ecosystems, albeit those are an essential part. We live in a place in which all aspects of it have derived from its environmental context. Our attitudes, daily routines, shared history, social norms, the framework for our society is grounded at the most basic point of our foundation in the region in which we live. How different would our lives be without the snow-capped mountains towering in the background of almost every point of our region? How different would our lives be without the Pacific coast, from which our temperate weather arrives? How different would they be without our evergreen forests, our resilient wildlife, and our pristine water sources? What would our towns look like? What would our cities look like? Across the entire Cascadian region and across international borders, our intrinsic ethos is and has been sculpted on the same regional dais. Our identities are shared athwart it. Across diverse ancestral backgrounds, innate characteristics, local cultures, languages, and affiliations, we are, essentially, one people. Cascadia's people are not identified by any ethnicity, religion, or political ideology. We're a diverse group in just about any characteristic that you can name. But the cultural foundation that permeates each of us is a uniting force, whether we are relatively new to the region or have lived our entire lives here. Even within each of our locally unique traditions and ways of life, our outlook on the world in which we live is common. We're largely tolerant of others who are different from ourselves, and we're willing to explore the backgrounds of other cultures, whether or not we subscribe to any strict adherence of organized religion or personal philosophy. We're defensive of our basic human liberties, whether we're politically inclined to be more individualistic or more communal. We love our beautiful natural surroundings and have a desire to protect them and do them justice, whether we're avid outdoor recreationalists, natural resource workers, or just admirers of the spectacular view. These character traits belonging to society at large can be observed in communities across Cascadia. The answer as to why we are the way we are is no mystery. Our cultural foundation, our communication with others, our upbringing, all of it is influenced by the environment in which we live. All of it is persuaded, in part, by our bioregion. Our lush, plentiful, and temperate surroundings are prime conditioning for the very culture we experience on a daily basis. If we go back to the people and communities who inhabited this region long before us, we find evidence of a network of indigenous tribes that flourished on interdependence, shared resources, communication with one another, and peaceful cooperation regardless of their differences. Today, Cascadia is an interdependent web of diverse cities and townships that espouse similar qualities and characteristics of its native ancestors, even after 2 centuries of Western influence and the developments of modern technology. To put it simply, our distinct environment directly affects our distinct culture as a society, and our regional culture directly influences our systems of cooperation. It is therefore that such systems are both compatible throughout our region, across local peculiarities and international borders, and fundamentally different from other regions' accumulation of culture. It should come as no surprise then that many are frustrated with our current condition of politics at a federal level in both the United States and Canada. Whether we considered ourselves a Democrat, Republican, Independent, Liberal, Conservative, Green, New Democrat, Anarchist, or something else entirely, we feel that something is fundamentally off with our political status quo in Ottawa and Washington, D.C., incompatible with the way we live our lives in Cascadia. And while our economic standing has recovered to an extent from the near catastrophic collapse less than a decade ago, the unity we're supposed to share throughout our respective countries continues to dissipate in spite of this. In the United States, polarization has hit its most potent position since the Civil War. The ability to truly compromise in Congress has severely diminished, seen as a sign of weakness instead of a noble gesture on behalf of the interests of the many. Out of fear and vulnerability since the terrorist attacks on September 11, 2001, perpetual warfare in the Middle East continues with no clear mission, and the United States government continues to allot more tax dollars to war than the next 10 highest spending countries combined. All the while, education standards continue to decline for the country's youth, and homelessness continues to be at stubbornly high levels since the Great Recession. Elected officials on both sides of the aisle, while well-intentioned, are continually swept into a corrupt system that bends to the will of special interests and the few most wealthy individual citizens in the country. The United States was once a country where its uniting factors were greater than its dividing factors. This is no longer the case. The United States is not, and really never has been, united in identity. It is seldom capable of uniting in purpose anymore, for this requires a majority to acknowledge and accept more than one way of thinking, which is discomforting for too many. In the past, the citizenry was able to recognize a bold idea and try something new for the sake of progress and the betterment of society. Now, bold ideas are attacked on ideological grounds from both sides of the aisle for not being in line with their philosophies. Wealthy donors fund advertising campaigns designed to aggravate the ill-informed and for the purpose of drowning out reasonable discourse, helping to ensure political victory for whatever side such an instance happens to benefit. With such a corrosive atmosphere present in federal politics, people in each region have developed exclusive identities of what it means to be quote-unquote American, to solidify their beliefs and convince themselves of a clear direction in which the country needs to go, which further divides entire regions of the country. In Canada, a country which has never possessed as forceful of an identity as its neighbor to the south, citizens from Newfoundland to British Columbia continually struggle with a sense, or lack thereof, of national belonging and distinctiveness. While Canada's parliamentary system of government is inherently more responsive and representative of the Canadian people, communities in Vancouver feel no more connected to communities in Toronto or Montreal than they do communities in Chicago or New York, except by definition of arbitrary international borders. Quebec, a recognized nation within Canada, has long desired to be more autonomous than other regions of the country and has worked to exercise its influence over the federal government. While the Bloc Québécois, the federal political party devoted solely to Quebec's interest, is not as strong in Canadian Parliament now as it was at the height of its power in the mid-1990s, citizens outside of that province tend to feel as if Quebec's clout has unduly shifted the balance of political power towards itself at the expense of other provinces. In recent years, Canada's federal government has begun taking advantage of the west portion of natural resources for the purpose of multinational corporate profiteering, with minimal input from the citizens whose ecosystems will be permanently affected. The federal government continues to try to authorize oil drilling and pipeline construction from Alberta through British Columbia among the non-partisan opposition from the citizens of British Columbia. And when man-made disasters do strike, they wreak havoc on the local ecosystems, killing entire communities of plant and animal life and leaving First Nation groups with nothing but disastrous end results. This has left many citizens jaded and doubtful they can do much of anything to force the federal government to serve their interests anytime soon. The problems we as Cascadians face in the United States and Canada are rooted in our fundamental regional differences. They result in the imbalance of power towards our current federal systems, which has led to exclusionary ethics perpetrated by the most privileged and powerful, and the squandering of opportunity. They result in the corrupt desire of some to unduly impose such ethics on the rest of the country as a means of solving problems that face us. They result in non-responsive federal representation and an inability to adapt to a more sustainable way of life or a more efficient system of cooperation. Each of these is directly contrary to our collective Cascadian identity. We are out of balance geographically and fundamentally as countries. The outcome of this imbalance stares us in the face every day. The recovery from our most recent economic downturn is being held back by the limits of our current federal institutions of power, which have attempted and failed to enact universal solutions on two countries assembled from particular regions. Our solutions for prosperity and tranquility in Cascadia and how our society will subsist afterward can, should, and will be different from the rest of the continent. We can't force balance on our two countries as they exist currently, but we do know how to restore balance in Cascadia. Between those of us who value freedom as a more collective principle and those who value it as a more individualistic principle. As Cascadians, we as Cascadians recognize the interdependence inherent in our region. Cascadians opposed to the use of federal power in the United States and Canada aren't inherently opposed to collective action on more local levels. The answer to solving the issues that face us on their essential levels so we make true progress is not purely individualistic in nature, nor is it purely collective in nature. It's a balance between the two, a new understanding of freedom. Such an answer is directly evident from our innate identity and culture as a region. Our answer is to connect as a region and to engage in those issues our way, the Cascadian way. Then and only then will we be able to progress beyond our current limitations and move forward with securing a better future and a better world for ourselves and all those who come after us. In order for this to happen, we Cascadians must organize and be willing to come together, despite differences of opinion and thought on contemporary political issues, to unite our region. And I speak of unition not solely in the sense of geography or political entities, but unition behind the common objective of Cascadia, self-determination. We desire to establish the foundations for a society where each person has the liberty from undue burdens imposed by an inadequate state or an overbearing majority. We desire freedom of opportunity, creating a system of interdependence that allows each of us to maximize our own potential. We desire to build and secure a clean, sustainable environment on which we can rely for generations to come. We desire open, honest communication throughout society for the sake of proper engagement and cultivation of our intellect. And these are all objectives that can be achieved peaceably through our democratic processes. These are not objectives based upon strict ideology or jingoism. They are all-inclusive and able to be adapted by all in our region who wish to seek them. Be you native or newcomer, urban or rural, left or right, religious or atheist, or any classification of niche labels by which we seem to categorize members of society, you can be Cascadian in this region. I am Cascadian. I have come to realize this to be a good and true fact. Not only am I lucky enough to call this place home, but I have also examined my surroundings and evolved my political consciousness past the indiscernible walls that are raised by the current federal paradigm of our political and cultural reality. This book serves as a testament to my civic beliefs and guide for any who share these sentiments in Cascadia. And in this book, I hope to achieve three things. First, help justify the greater movement for Cascadia. Second, define a clear, tangible goal we can work towards. And third, empower the citizens of this region to take sensible action. I do not have the answers to achieve utopia, and I cannot predict what will happen in popular culture or current events that will facilitate our movement's growth organically. I do, however, have a bold idea on what our shared foundation is and how to achieve a new future for Cascadia, which I look forward to sharing with you in this book if you choose to look into it further. Cascadia is not my idea. It's a symbolic convergence that has the potential to move the mountains of mainstream thought. It's a dormant reality waiting to be discovered and ascertained. The ideas in this book are not all mine. I've analyzed the writings of others on subjects that concern us, and I attempt to coalesce them into a coherent argument that has the fidelity necessary for a popular movement to grow. For all the arguments that follow, I say as a Cascadian for Cascadia and only for Cascadia. By realizing our potential and truly being Cascadian, we can bring clarity and hope to not just ourselves, but anyone who looks to us for inspiration. I wish for a tranquil future in which I and everyone else can live the purpose we were meant to epitomize. I am Cascadian, and I'd like to share this vision with you. So that's
Thank you.
So the rest goes on to talk about bioregionalism, the concept of freedom, political status quo, all that in more depth. So if you're interested, again, there are copies back there. And there are copies, I know, in the King County Library, if not libraries closer to where you live. So if anybody has any questions about the book, I'd be happy to answer them, or at least try to answer them. Mark.
Have you spent time in Canada?
A little bit, yeah. Not a ton, but I've, in the Cascadian regions of Canada, I've been up in Vancouver, Victoria, and then in Canada in general, it's mostly Ontario, so Thunder Bay, Toronto, and the like.
So did you interview people? Because I really like your perspective on the cross-country divide and how Quebec kind of has that vibe to them.
A lot of the insights of what led me to write those parts in this introduction were taken from a lot of actual polling data and then quotes that news organizations in Canada, like the CBC, quoted people around that data. So for example, there was a poll that came out, I think 5 years ago or so, and they asked people in British Columbia, do you identify with more the west coast of the United States or people in the rest of Canada? And a slight majority said the west coast of the United States. So it's that type of insights and polling data that I looked at to kind of come up with the insights that I read from this introduction. Yeah?
What inspired you to write your book?
That is an excellent question, and to be honest, I honestly don't remember. I do remember clearly waking up one Saturday morning in June of 2012 with an epiphany, really. And I wrote down some notes. It was maybe half a page long, and then I told myself I should do something with this. And then I started reading and researching and just started writing. And 4 years later, I have this. So I honestly do not know what sparked it. Yeah.
So first of all, it's actually 6 years later.
Yeah, well, this
Oh, this
was published in 2016.
Okay,
Yeah.
got it.
So now it's 6 years later.
Second, you said something about the state of U.S. politics that struck me as odd. That it's very divided, polarized, and that's driving people in different regions across the country to establish regional identities that only increase the division.
Yes.
So that seems bad, and yet Cascadia seems like just exactly that type of regional identity, which you're pretty clearly supporting.
Yeah, so it seems bad in the sense of people trying to force the United States to work as one coherent nation and trying to force everything to think the same way and behave the same way. I just don't think that's possible. I think in America's past that was easier to do because an overwhelming majority of the population pretty much resided in one or two bioregions, which is the Northeast and the South. And over especially the past 50 to 60 years, post-World War II especially, as populations in other regions of the country that are fit into their own bioregions have gained in population, have come into their own in understanding like what it means to live there and all of that. I go into this in one of my chapters here. Basically, I kind of view the United States and Canada, think of their national identity, so to speak, as this circle, but they're made up of the commonalities of all these bioregional circles. And as these populations in all the bioregions grow, they're becoming more distinctive. The commonalities between them shrink, which causes the national identity to shrink as well. And it's becoming harder and harder for everybody throughout the entire country to just latch onto this one thing of, quote unquote, what it means to be American and really live into that. So I go into this specifically in depth in one chapter. But I would say, the United States is an amazing experiment in freedom and democracy, and I see it going on for hundreds of more years. But I don't think, if my theory of bioregionalism and the way I view it is correct, that it can exist and thrive with its existing geographic boundaries. I think it may have to contract in the future if it's to really thrive again.
Like to just one of those regions?
One, maybe two. Congress, for a long time, Congress operated fairly well, incorporating mostly 2, 3 if you count the Great Plains. It could do so again. Or maybe I'm completely wrong. You might read this and be like, this guy's whack. I have no idea. But that's where I'm coming from with that sort of argument.
I'd just like to comment on that because I really could feel it when you described it.
Mm-hmm.
The idea of if you don't allow, it's like diversity. If you don't allow diversity and accept people's diversity, then there is this really constricting kind of a feel that promotes more violence and hatred. But if you allow diversity, so if Cascadia is allowed to be Cascadia, and another region is allowed to be the region they are, and you accept that and honor that, then there's this feeling of expansion.
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to comment that that's what I was feeling when you described it.
Oh, good. Thank you. I appreciate that. And just to be perfectly clear, that doesn't necessarily mean that all these regions will break off into their own political nation states in the future. We could have political reform within the United States and within Canada that allows for this diversity to thrive. That's entirely possible. But the way it goes now, we're having a hard time dealing with that in Congress, and I know there are some issues up in Ottawa as well. So that's what I tried to comment on.
I have one question too.
Mm-hmm.
So it came out in 2016?
It was published in 2016.
Oh, okay. And
Yep.
so have you been around promoting it at all? Or?
I started a website. I've been writing some blog posts. It was hard for me to do a lot of any sort of actual in-person promotion because for 4 years between 2013 and 2017, I actually had to move away to the Midwest for a few years before coming back, so I couldn't really take a lot of time to just fly out here for a specific book promotion. But I've been trying to get this in more places. and more bookstores. Horizon's one of the first ones to really take the initiative and like get a bulk order. Thank you, Brandon, and push it. So I will be looking to try to do more of these in the future. I just don't know how.
I would like to suggest King's Books in Tacoma. They're
yeah.
awesome, and I'm pretty sure that they would be welcoming.
King's Books in
King's Book,
Tacoma.
yeah.
Okay, I'll definitely look into
Yeah,
that.
they
Thank you
have
so
great
much.
space, and they do a lot of events there. So
Awesome.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yep.
So it occurs to me that there are a number of groups that might take the idea that we in Cascadia are all one people kind of hard. One or several would be some native tribes who don't want to be seen as one people with all the European colonizers, and another would be conservative rural folks on the east side of the Cascades in the US. Any thoughts about that?
So bioregionalism as an idea, and if you understand collective identity, is based off of place. Things like what political ideology, whether you're conservative in more rural parts east of the Cascades or more liberal in urban parts in the west, or whether your ancestral background is indigenous and your ancestors have been here for tens of thousands of years, or whether you're brand new to this continent. If you understand your identity and the way we act and interact with each other is based off of bioregionalism, those things become inconsequential. Now, there are very real issues that exist in our society today, systemic injustices, especially with First Nations and indigenous tribes that exist in Washington, Oregon, Idaho, British Columbia, that are a real factor, and we have to respect that. And as a white man, I think the best I can do most of the time is just to listen to their concerns and make sure that this movement advocates for those concerns and works with them, either helping lead it or most likely as an ally to stand beside them. And hopefully over time, this idea of bioregionalism, of seeing ourselves not based on our bloodline or linear line or ethnicity or anything like that, and seeing who we are as we based on place instead of human characteristics becomes more prominent. And over time, if people can accept that, these issues of systemic injustices that are very real in our society today can begin to dissipate. At least that's the hope.
So when you were living outside of the bioregion, did you have some picture of your previous view that you
I
looked to for
actually,
inspiration?
on my wedding ring, I have ingrained in here the Olympic Mountains that you see over
Oh,
the
wow.
Sound. So whenever I got homesick, I had this little tradition because I worked remotely from home. I kept my job out here in Seattle. I would turn on. Has anybody heard of the band The Lonely Forest? They're disbanded since, but they were out of Anacortes, and they had this song called "I Don't Want to Live There," and it's just it spoke to. They were on tours in California and the rest of the country, and always missing home. So I would turn on that song and kind of just stare at my wedding ring and turn it like that to look at the mountains, and that kind of gave me it relieved the homesickness that I was feeling during those years. So that's what I did.
I've only been out of the country for like 2 weeks at a time, but I still know I miss that.
Yeah.
Just the vibe, seeing the trees, is something that I miss when I leave.
Yep.
So
Absolutely.
Is employment something that you think about, as in businesses that operate in Cascadia? Do you believe that they should primarily employ Cascadians as opposed to outsourcing?
Yeah, I don't go into that point really in the book, but if you're to live and operate bioregionally, I think just that mindset kind of encourages more local businesses, more small businesses, period. That's not to say businesses can't grow, but there's something about growing a business to the point where it gets, almost too big to fail, or where, it profiteers off of everybody and then outsources all of its labor else. It seems so contradictory. So yeah, in a sense, I think living bioregionally does have that sense of keeping some stuff local and hiring, people that are where you live and where you operate.
And I will be talking a little bit more about that kind of concept. I know, Brandon, you touch on that stuff in your presentation a little bit.
We still have 2 great presentations to go, and I think there'll be more of your questions that'll be answered. So, anything else? Well, cool. Thank you very much for listening. I appreciate it. And I'll be here after to have more discussions with people if you so choose.